The next step would be to hire a professional editor. This is a must. Please do not edit your own book. Just like you would go to a hairstylist to cut your hair, they are skilled at cutting hair. So that's why you go there. You're not cutting your own hair. I need you to know that editors are skilled at what they do, and we have editors for a purpose. And so I really want you to utilize editors. I work with both a content editor who looks at my plot, my story structure, the overall story in general, and then I also work with a copyright editor who focuses on, the details. So they're focusing on capitalization, punctuation, line breaks, things like that. So they're looking at two different things, but they're skilled at what they do, and that is why I do not want you to be editing your own book. Plus, I have to tell you, in the industry, things change so quickly. And, I remember I was shocked when my professional editor asked me to stop double spacing after my periods. And I asked her why, and she said, well, because that's not the standard anymore. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't know about that. I'm out of college now. I'm not reading what the standards are on punctuation. So this is what I'm talking about. Please remember, we have professional editors for a reason. Let's talk a little bit more about editors. So we talked about content editor. Another thing that they look at is they might actually they might ask the question, does your manuscript make a convincing case or argument? And does it speak effectively to a target audience? So not only are they looking at the plot and the structure and the character development, but they're going to look at the overall case and say, gosh, is this really going to hit your target audience? And copywriters, that's what they're looking at. They're looking at the Chicago Manual of Style or the Associated Press Style Book. And those are those rules that I talked to you about that are constantly changing, that unless you are keeping up with them, this is why you hire an editor. Submissions. What does this mean? Well, you've written your book. You've had it edited by a professional editor. Now, if you're going to be looking for a publisher to publish your book, you need to submit your manuscript. You want to prepare your polished manuscript to be mailed or emailed to publishers. I will tell you that is about 70% of publishers are now requiring submissions to be digital, and we still have about 30% that are asking manuscripts to be mailed in and as a hard copy still. So don't be shocked to be going to, your local copy store to be running copies of your manuscript, because some people still want hard copies to be submitted. There's some jargon. So we talked about in Module 1, unsolicited manuscripts. That's a manuscript that is sent to a publishing house without being requested, or otherwise it's not an unsolicited manuscript. May be when you send a manuscript to a publisher and you do not have an agent to support that. So it can mean those two things. Most large publishers do not allow unsolicited manuscripts, which means they want you to be supported by an agent or that manuscript was requested. And so publishers might go to agents and say, hey, we're looking for an adult novel that is in this genre. Do you have anything on your docket? And that means, they are requesting certain manuscripts. Another jargon word that you're going to hear a lot is called an SASE or an SSAE or an SAE. SASE stands for a self-addressed stamped envelope. So you will still have publishers asking you to send in an envelope. And why? Because that's the envelope they're going to use when they give you your rejection or your acceptance letter. Another one is SSAE, which means stamped self-addressed envelope, or just stamped addressed envelope is SAE. So they have different acronyms to represent them. And so basically it's just you're paying the postage. Do your research when you're submitting. I talked about this in Module 1, that submitting to Publisher A may look very different to the guidelines of submitting to Publisher B. Know what the publishers want, because I will be completely honest, I've spoken to agents, I've spoken to publishers, and if you do not follow the guidelines, that let's say you send your manuscript and you didn't follow the guidelines, and maybe you don't have a query letter, or maybe you don't have 2 copies of the manuscript, but there's something about your submission that you did not follow the guidelines, that could go right into the slush pile. That could send your manuscript into the garbage. They are that particular about their submissions. Document your submissions and track your responses. So I created some sort of a chart. It was like an Excel chart. Who is the editor that I submitted to? What was the date I submitted it? What was their suggested response time that they thought they would give me? So some of them said, 4 to 6 weeks. Some of them said 4 to 6 months. So I made sure that I had everything documented in one place so that I could have a record and I could follow up with those publishers if I did not hear back from them. And if I got that rejection letter, I would add it to my chart so I knew who I heard back from. And don't be afraid to follow up. If you don't hear back from them and they said that it would be 4 to 6 months and now you're into the 7th month, follow up with the editor and see what's going on. Don't be afraid to email. Don't be afraid to actually call and just say, I'm following up. It's been 7 months. This is the manuscript that I've submitted. Be relentless is what I'm going to tell you. Don't be afraid to be relentless, because that's how you move ahead in this industry, is you are your own advocate and you're not afraid to ask for what you want and you're not afraid to go for what you want. Let's talk about Writer's Market. Writer's Market is a submission resource. You can get a book that is similar to Writer's Market, and that's what I prefer. I like to have the book in my hand at my house that I can browse through, highlight, fold over the pages, or highlight sticky notes, certain pages that I want to go back to. Or you can use Writer's Market. And on Writer's Market, you can find places to sell your writing, whether you have a book, a manuscript, or an article idea. You can manage your submissions here with an easy record-keeping tool, and you can stay up to date with the latest publishing industry news. So you can subscribe to Writer's Market, and I believe it's as little as $4.95 a month. I think that's what I paid. And you don't have to sign up for an entire year. You can use it on a month-to-month basis. This is the book that I really enjoy. It's the Children's Book and Illustrator's Guide, and they have this for adult market. They have this for young adult market. This is another resource. This is where you find out the guidelines for different publishers for their submissions. This is where you find out their current editor, who you address the envelopes to. This is where you find out their addresses and their emails in order to submit your work. This is key. So you can use one or the other. You can use the website or you can use the book. And there are a couple other resources out there, but tried and true, these are the 2 I'm suggesting: Writer's Market website or this guide you can find on Amazon. The query letter. This is another jargon word. You might hear this and say, what on earth is a query letter? You can Google it, but basically a query letter is like a cover letter. So remember when you were applying for your first job out of college, you have to have a cover letter with your work. A query letter is very similar. Broken down, this is the format of the query letter. The first paragraph is your hook. What is the hook for your book? What is the elevator pitch? The second paragraph would be your manuscript's synopsis. So if you were to look on the back of the book, what would that say? That's what a synopsis is. Your third paragraph is about you as an author and your platform. So this is where you're really selling yourself. Maybe you haven't written a book yet, but talk about developing your platform. Publishers now really are looking at authors who already have a platform developed. So you might have a website, you might have a blog, you might, as you're writing your book, start thinking about, and we'll talk about this in another module, but start thinking about building your audience, getting readers, getting followers, getting fans on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. So talk about your platform in that third paragraph. And your fourth paragraph, give your contact information and talk about why the agent or publisher would be a good fit. Try to make this personal and show that you've done your research. So you might be pitching an agent or a publisher, and you might tell them the reason you're pitching them is because you're fond of their work. And you can even say, I know this book that you supported, and I love this book, and I think we're such a good fit because my book is a similar theme, it has a similar message, but I think it's going to reach a different audience, something like that. You want to woo them in that fourth paragraph. Agents. Decide whether or not you need an agent. That's what you have to decide before moving forward. Again, if you're going to submit to certain traditional publishers, you might not even work on submitting to the publishers. You might start with your manuscript and then finding an agent. So think of it as a fork in the road. You have your manuscript, and now you're at the fork in the road. Do you go towards agent, or you go towards publisher? Okay. And if you're self-publishing, you're going to know which way you're going to go. You're going to go towards that publisher, okay? But you might need to go that path of agent if you're trying to search for a certain publisher that requires an agent. So it depends on which publishing path you're going to take. You're going to pitch an agent in a very similar way that you're going to pitch a publisher. And what does an agent do? They are going to then take your manuscript and they're going to sell it and find you a contract, find you a deal with a publisher. It expedites the process because agents have relationships with the publishers. So again, it's going to expedite the process, but an agent basically does the same thing as what you would do pitching a publisher, but they're going to expedite that process. And how? How do you know who an agent is? Well, very similar to the Writer's Market website is a website called agentquery.com, and you can find agents to submit query letters to. So once you sell your book and you give a query letter to an agent, you get an agent, then that agent will take over and do the same thing, searching for a deal for you with a publisher. I hope I make that clear. So an agent basically would do the same thing as you would be doing, but they have a relationship with publishers, and they're going to work with publishers who require an agent. Agentquery.com, I just told you about that. It's a wonderful resource, and it's free. So this one you do not have to pay for. And you're looking for a literary agent is another word that you can call them. I should tell you too, what are the percentages that agents get? It's very different, but I need you to know that if you are working with an agent, they're going to get a certain percentage upfront of your royalties. And so you'll then be splitting your fees with both the publisher, now you're splitting with the agent as well, and yourself. So it's just going to be divided into different groups, and you're going to be giving a share now to the agent. Submissions. I want to give you an example of being creative. So when I was pitching certain agents, I was getting frustrated because I wasn't hearing back from people. And one of my friends is in advertising, and she suggested I get creative. So along with my submission to a certain agent, I think I was submitting my book, Chocolate Milk, Por Favor, or maybe it was the Potato Chip Champ. But along with my query and my manuscript, I sent a few bags of potato chips. So think about an agent and how many different manuscripts they're reading and submissions they're reading. When you get a bag of potato chips, you might pay a little extra attention to that submission than you would in a plain envelope. Did I get a handwritten letter back from that agent? I absolutely did. He told me my story was not a good fit for him, and he did not have any publishers looking for work like that. So we did not work together, but I got a response in a very timely manner, and it was a personalized response. It was not a form letter, which is what you normally get from agents and publishers when you're getting a denial or a rejection. And this is from Brad Herzog, who we have the case study you're going to listen to in Module 2, the case study interview. So this is what he says. He says, you have to be optimistic, but realistic at the same time. So when you're thinking about the traditional market, you're thinking about, submitting your work, be optimistic, but realistic at the same time. So please take some time after you soak in and let this information really settle into your system, and you've taken your notes and maybe you've gone back and listened to the audio, go ahead and listen to the case study with Brad. Brad is an amazing author. He has written over 30 books, children's books, adult novels. Brad has a very unique situation because he started off working with some of the top 5 big publishers. So he was traditionally published, and now he's going the self-published route. And so you get to hear from another person their experiences from both sides of the spectrum, I guess you would say, from going from traditional to self-published, and why he has done both. So I love this case study. It is so valuable. So be sure to listen to that. And then don't forget to go to the next steps workbook and think about, now that you've listened to module 2, all about the manuscript, please write down what are your next steps. Write it in your next steps workbook and then go ahead and put a date to it. What are you going to do to take action after you've heard this information? What do you need to do? Stay tuned for module 3.